Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. We have another big episode to go through today. In yesterday's video we covered a lot of the announcements and forecasts from Premier Li Keqiang's Sunday government work report, part of the annual 2 sessions being held currently in Beijing, as well as a few other key releases like the Ministry of Finance report. A lot of salient points were covered in yesterday's video, and if you haven't seen it and you are interested in China's economy, I would highly recommend watching it first. First up for today's video though, let's cover a few more points that did not make yesterday's video, but are nonetheless important to be abreast of. The theme of this year's 2 sessions appears to be stability. Unsurprising, considering the country has just emerged from 3 tough years of zero COVID policy and remains facing several systemic challenges, including a housing crisis. Indeed, Japanese financial media outlet Nikkei Asia observed yesterday that the word stability was mentioned 38% more times this year than in 2022. Quote, marking the most frequent use of the keyword under Xi, who became president early in 2013. End quote. Adding that Li stressed that China will stabilize prices, employment, and supply chains. And of course, 2 other sectors in need of stability, which the Premier stressed, are real estate and the financial sector, with Li calling for, quote, effectively preventing and diffusing major economic and financial risks, end quote, echoing a similar statement made by General Secretary Xi Jinping at the Central Economic Work Conference in December last year. Premier Li added, quote, there are many risks and hidden dangers in the real estate market. The operating risks of some small and medium-sized financial institutions have been exposed, end quote. Real estate remains one of the biggest challenges for Beijing's policymakers, who have arguably mismanaged it for years now. Indeed, the housing crisis, as we know it currently, that is, the collapse in confidence in both developers specifically and the wider housing market generally, triggered by Evergrande back in 2021, is just part of a larger systemic problem. What the country is going through now is simply a slump caused by regulators' efforts to curb the excesses of highly over-leveraged developers. We are now in the hangover period of a liquidity crunch triggered by clumsy policy implementation. To shore up the property market, policymakers introduced a series of measures in 2022, including a 16-point rescue package in November to help qualified developers secure more financing. However, even if sales crawl back for developers, the underlying systemic challenge remains, and it is this challenge which Premier Li Keqiang is warning his government of. Quote, we should ensure effective risk prevention and mitigation in high-quality, leading real estate enterprises, help them improve debt-to-asset ratios, and prevent unregulated expansion in the real estate market to promote stable development of the real estate sector. End quote. The other systemic elephant in the room is, of course, fiscal in nature. Quote, we should improve the mix of local government debt maturities, reduce the burden of interest payments, and prevent a build-up of new or hidden debts while working to reduce existing ones. End quote. Last Friday we explored this issue in depth, and there is no need to repeat that again now. For anyone who is interested in this fiscal challenge at the local level, check out last Friday's episode. For our purposes here though, we just note that Li identifies this as a key risk to the financial system. We remember from a recent Chinese Academy of Fiscal Sciences report that local governments paid 1.1 trillion yuan, $158.7 billion in interest on their bonds in 2022, a 20.8% jump year on year. The central government has announced hundreds of billions of dollars of extra borrowing this year to alleviate this debt pressure from some of the most encumbered localities. On Sunday, the powerful National Development and Reform Commission repeated Li's warnings and policy priorities, pledging to, quote, strengthen and refine modern financial supervision, end quote. Of course, land use sales is the area which connects these 2 financial risks, real estate and government fiscal health, together. We remember that government revenue from sales of land use rights to property developers plunged more than 20% to $1.1 trillion in 2022. Based on the national budget released on Sunday, it appears that Beijing expects another sluggish year in 2023, with the Ministry of Finance budget forecasting 0.4% growth year-on-year. Many local governments will feel this acutely, but these are stories for the future. For now, let's close this first part on systemic financial risk with this analysis from Morgan Stanley yesterday, which discusses the implications of what we have just covered. Quote, "The government report indicates preventing major economic and financial risk as one key focus for 2023. We think this will lead to less short-term stimulus with a negative long-term impact. It will also mean a greater need to restore the profitability of weaker banks to enable them to better digest the risks they have been exposed to." End quote. Next up, more on the economy, and is TikTok about to be banned in the United States? Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. If you're one of the 50% of people who watch but are not subscribed and you think you would enjoy more of this sort of content, maybe consider subscribing. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and be part of the community that keeps this channel sustainable and subscriber supported, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. In the interests of some variety, let's take a detour here and briefly cover a few salient US-China related developments before returning to our coverage of the 2 sessions economic updates. And first, TikTok. U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner told U.S. media on Sunday that he plans to introduce a bill this week to allow the U.S. to, quote, systematically ban Chinese technology, including services like TikTok, end quote. The senator explains, quote, "You have 100 million Americans on TikTok for 90 minutes every day. They are taking data from Americans, not keeping it safe. But what worries me more with TikTok is that it can be a propaganda tool," end quote. The Democrat said that the bill has bipartisan support. He also added some other comments on China, which I think perfectly captures the current bipartisan view towards China held by Washington elites. Quote, "I think for a long time, conventional wisdom was, the more you bring China into the world order, the more they're going to change. And that assumption was just plain wrong," end quote. He adds that China presents a threat to the US beyond that of the Soviet Union. This move in the Senate comes hot on the heels of fresh sanctions against Chinese companies through an updated Commerce Department entity list, which we covered in Sunday's video. Okay, that is TikTok, or more generally technology. The other T we need to cover is Taiwan. Today, UK-based Japanese-owned Financial Times broke the story that Taiwanese leader Tsai Ing-wen, quote, persuaded, end quote, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to meet in the US, quote, due to security concerns and in an attempt to avoid another crisis with China, end quote. The outlet reported, citing an unnamed senior Taiwanese official, that Taipei shared intelligence with McCarthy about possible threats, which the House Speaker, quote, concluded were reasonable, end quote. This report was soon after supplemented with an article from UK-based Reuters, which writes, citing, quote, 4 other sources, including US officials and people with knowledge of the US and Taiwan administration's thinking, end quote, that both sides, quote, were deeply uneasy that a future visit by McCarthy would severely increase tensions across the Taiwan Strait at a time when the island is preparing for its own presidential election early next year, end quote. Tsai will visit both California and New York in early April, that is next month, as part of a trip to Central America. Okay, now let's return with our coverage to the 2 sessions policy announcements with a few more important economic miscellanea. Science and technology self-sufficiency was a key theme in the government report. On Sunday, the head of the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology announced that China plans to build around 600,000 5G base stations in 2023, bringing the country's total to more than 2.9 million. Priority will be for installations in rural areas and industrial zones, the official said. On this general theme, Beijing also recently published its so-called Digital Development Plan, designed for, quote, the advancement of Chinese modernization in the digital era, and provide solid support for the development of new advantages in the country's competitiveness." End quote. According to the plan, important progress will be made in the construction of a digital China by 2025, quote, "with effective interconnectivity in digital infrastructure, a significantly improved digital economy, and major breakthroughs achieved in digital technology innovation," end quote. According to the plan, China will continue to support healthy development of so-called platform firms. This is big tech it's referring to here. The plan also stipulates that development of the digital economy will be a key measure for the performance of local officials. Speeches at the two sessions these last several days once again make it clear what is driving this push for Chinese self-sufficiency in science and technology. Quote, "Some Western developed countries have imposed blockades on China's industrial chain, and there is a risk of supply interruption. To achieve our goal, we must achieve self-reliance in existing technologies and self-strength in future technologies." End quote. Meanwhile, yesterday we discussed China's release of this year's official GDP growth target of around 5% and how some commentators, though not all by any means, were underwhelmed and even disappointed by it. State media was quick to push back against any criticism of the growth target, however. For example, in a piece titled "Foreign Media's Slander Against China's GDP Target Ignores Nation's High-Quality Development," the state-run Global Times wrote yesterday, quote, "The expected target of about 5% is in line with the trend of economic operation and the law of economic development, and it is also conducive to guiding all parties to pay more attention to improving the quality and efficiency of economic development." End quote. Evidently, however, a handful of analysts and members of the foreign media were not the only ones disappointed with the growth target. Chinese stocks underperformed in Asia after the growth target's publication, with the onshore benchmark CSI, China Securities Index 300 index, slipping as much as 1% early on Monday. Quote, "Frankly, this number, 5% growth target, was not even in our possible scenarios. I think this means that any anticipation for massive stimulus, either for real estate or for investment, is going to be seen as falsified, at least in the near term." End quote. Though we should note that several leading institutions were not surprised at all by the growth target. For example, Japanese-based Nomura wrote yesterday that the growth target is, quote, "reasonable and rational," end quote. Especially, it writes, considering the many challenges facing the Chinese economy going forward. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.